absolutely. I think all of my colleagues have done a wonderful job painting a picture of the changing landscape in the Middle East and how the United States can address the moment with its policy towards Iran. Specifically, at a high level, we suggest a policy that embraces the inevitability of regime change through isolation of the regime and support for and recognition of the resistance in Iran. In particular, to implement this policy, we offer several recommendations for the incoming Trump administration. For example, first of all, we suggest the reinstation of the maximum pressure policy to isolate and weaken Tehran's financial coffers. This includes things like intensifying diplomatic pressure on Iran by immediately triggering the UN snapback sanctions mechanism. It involves things like fortifying international alliances that are aligned against the regime in Tehran, imposing all forms of sanctions against the IRGC and key regime elements that are involved in repression and regional destabilization, with a focus on human rights violations and crackdowns on women and minorities within Iran. Second, we suggest a formal recognition of the organized opposition within Iran. I think it's important for the U.S. to address what was a missing factor in the first iteration of the maximum pressure policy by recognizing the legitimate opposition within the country, such as, in particular, groups like the National Council of Resistance of Iran, and the United States should endorse their roadmap for democratic regime change. Third, relatedly, it's important to recognize the legitimacy of the struggle for regime change. As the United States Congress has recommended in several official resolutions, U.S. policy should provide political support to amplify the voices of Iranian protesters, and in particular, the MEK's resistance units, and acknowledge their right to dignity and to overthrow the current regime. Alongside that, we need to launch initiatives to debunk Tehran's misinformation campaigns by investigating its lobbying network and focusing on particular on those who attack the Iranian resistance. Specifically, I think it's important to investigate individuals that are tied to the so-called Iran Experts Initiative that was exposed in recent years for lobbying on behalf of the regime and targeting its opponents within the United States. Additionally, we also recommend investigating and designating the IRGC and its proxy networks, focusing specifically beyond the IRGC as an overall entity, but on key individuals and groups that are working on behalf of the political proxies, including, I must say, those who are deceptively posing as opposition figures to facilitate misinformation efforts. Sixth, we recommend promoting accountability for human rights violations. And it's important for the United States to advocate for international investigations into the regime's long list of crimes, such as the 1988 massacre of political prisoners, as well as brutal crackdowns on peaceful protesters and the recent escalations in executions of political prisoners. Seventh, we recommend publicly supporting grassroots campaigns. For example, there's movements like the anti-execution campaigns that are led by political prisoners. This is an important way for the United States to signal its allegiance to human rights and democracy and human dignity within Iran. And lastly, as all of these elements help facilitate weakness inside the regime and support for actual regime change, it's important for the United States to prepare for a post-regime transition. It's important to work with our allies to plan for the aftermath of the regime's fall and work with allies both on the ground and regionally to ensure readiness when the day comes that Tehran falls. Luckily, there is a detailed roadmap that has been set out by the NCRI to facilitate a transition to democratic elections in a secular democratic republic, and it's important for our allies and the United States to recognize this and prepare for it. I think these recommendations provide an actionable framework for the incoming administration, one that combines pressure on the regime with accountability for human rights abuses and an embrace of the viable democratic alternative. By effectively implementing these measures, the United States can finally eliminate the threat of a nuclear regime in Tehran and foster a transition to a peaceful and democratic government in Iran and for the region.
Thank you